Mapping. I'm here with Brandon Williams and Kyle Ince, and Matt Ivan is joining us today, and he's going to do a presentation about versioning. So Brandon's going to start us off with some ProjectWise numbers and some issues and answers that have come up over the last month or so. And Kyle and I will be monitoring chat and trying to answer questions as we go along, and we'll also answer questions at the end. Um, I did want to mention we're sending out an email this morning. We're going to update everyone's Open Roads Designer ProjectWise and Connection client this weekend. So look for that email to come out sometime this morning. You ready, Brandon?
Yep, thank you, Jack.
All right, go ahead.
All right. So like Jack mentioned, we're just going to go over some numbers real quick, then over some Q&As, and then I'll hand it over to Matt with the more interesting stuff. So we usually did this in the past webinar, so we thought we'd do it again, just kind of look at some statistics points for ProjectWise itself. Since last month, we've added almost 12,000 more documents. The average document size actually went up 0.45 megabytes, which isn't that much, but more importantly, the document file size, so how many documents and their size in total came out to over 101 gigs added since last month, so that's pretty big as well. Looking into folders, maximum folder depth is still not going to be. We actually might take these two out because I don't ever seeing 16 folders deep ever happening again. But the total number of work areas and folders went up 69,000. So folders 68,804 of that 69,460, and we added 656 work areas, which is quite a bit. This does include bridges, culverts, and things. Those are included for work areas as well. Populated folders with documents went up about 1,800, and these also did not change. Looking at references, nothing changed except for of course, the number of documents with actual reference files attached to them. It went up 611 since last webinar. Users, we've added 37 users in the past month. Maximum users per group went up 7, and the average users per group went up 1. We did have inactive more than 1 month actually it's negative 83 because it went down 83, which is good, but the other ones went up 9 and 14, and users who haven't logged in went up 5. Okay, and here's just a little users login last month. This was the ranking of total number of logins for March. Okay, so some ProjectWise common Q&As that we get. One of them is, where's the plan reviews folder? I've gotten this a couple times. So just a reminder, we did take the plan reviews folder out of OO admin because that's where it used to be. And we created this folder called 950 reviews, which you can see in this work area here. It does start out empty when a project is created. Everyone has full control to this 950 reviews. That's a part of the project. So all ODOT users and all consultants a part of the project will have the full control to the 950 reviews. So you can create subfolders and documents, whatever you'd like to. In the O3 standards ProjectWise templates, we do have 2 different templates. We have a plan reviews full and a plan reviews reduced. Of course, reduced having reduced folder structure, which I'll show in a bit. The 950 reviews folder does have an Ohio DOT reviews workflow tied to it, which is just these permissions. Administrator has full control, and everyone has create, read, delete, and write access. Okay, so here's a little demo of adding the plan reviews folder to the 950 reviews. I have a project here that I want to add plan reviews to. So you can see in the O3 standards ProjectWise templates, I have the plan reviews full. So I can go ahead and maximize that. You can see it has stage 1 and 2 in it. When the reduced does not, it only has stage 3, and it's missing some of those right away stuff as well. So you can click and you can easily click and drag that into the 950 reviews folder. However, there is a little issue with that. So I prefer a copy, which I'll show next. You can see it just refreshed my whole ProjectWise page, and I had to navigate back to the project. So there is a better way of doing that, which I'll show here. But you can see the 950 reviews now has the reduced plain reviews folder. Okay, so I'll delete this and give another demonstration. You can see that's fairly easy, and everybody should be able to do that. So if I go back to the ProjectWise templates, and this time do a right click, you can go to copy and just do a paste. I like this a little bit better because you have to select the 950 reviews folder, so it locks that in, and then you can paste that in there, and it's going to copy over that full plain review structure. Okay, and then we can maximize that and see that stage 1, 2, 3, everything's in there. Okay. So another question we got was, someone was getting an error here. So to look a little bit deeper into this error, well, for one, it says directory path name is too long. So if we parse out some of that, we get this right here. This is actually, believe it or not, a file. This is a file name. So you can see that it had an error checking out a file of document, and this is the file name, which consists of 124 characters. So it's 124 characters long. A fun fact, Windows maximum file path, up until recent, they did do an update to this, is 260 characters. So that's almost half of the maximum characters for Windows. So you can see that being a problem, especially if you had a network share with a fairly long path, that you might be having issues trying to open this document even in Windows. Also, not to mention, some software has a lot of issues opening special characters and also just long file names in general. So as a common practice, I came up with some things that I personally recommend for file naming. One is avoid special characters. There's a lot more than this, but this is the most common I see. For example, this one had parentheses in it, and it also had a comma in that file name. I would just avoid those. Some software doesn't understand what to do with it, and you might just run into issues down the road. Also, I would recommend no spaces in file names. I see that quite often. I personally like to use underscores or dashes if you're going to put a space in it. Some older software, some legacy software can't understand the space. So it's just, better to use underscores and dashes. Also, this is my preference. It's called camel casing, where you do capital for each word, so it's easier to distinguish what the file name of the document is. And just as we showed previously, avoid long file names. Again, there are maximum file paths and names for software. There is a registry key now that Windows 10 has that you can increase the maximum file path, but you have to have permissions to do that, and it's kind of weird that you have to have a register key just to increase the maximum. So again, just best practice, avoid long file names. So I had a user request. They wanted to change the SFN folder names. So this is actually the format that they wanted. They wanted county, route, SLM, and then SD, which is I think special designation. Um, Users can't. These are work areas. You can see these icons. Users cannot change properties in work areas. Only administrators can, and it's not. We can't really give you that permission either. It's just administrators, can only change work areas. So we came up with a solution to add to the project properties refreshing script, just to add what he was looking for to the description. So when you click on structures folder, this is your document pane. You can see that now. So that's being constantly updated now. And Ellis, the same time project properties are being updated. So that is available now. Ironically, it had another suggestion, except this was for work areas. This is going to be available this weekend. I was going to push it out, but I had a user request. Instead of seeing PID, they wanted to see county route, type, route, and SLM. So essentially the project name. I think they said county route section, but I added the route type in there, since that's part of the project name in Ellis anyways. So here you can see we're in Lake. I made up it's a real PID, but I added this PID in. I made up a description. As you can see, this is GEA, which is not Lake. Probably should have put Lake there, but just to give you an idea what it's going to look like. So when you click on a county, you're going to see your PIDs, and in the description, you're going to see county route type, route, and section. Okay, so that's all I had. I'm going to hand this over to Matt Iben to go over the document versioning part of things.
All right, thanks, Brandon. Thanks, Jack. Can you see my screen?
No, yeah, no.
No? I thought I did something wrong. Okay, there we go. It looks like it worked. All right, so I'll just jump right in. So this sort of came up after a discussion with a district user, and I'll give an example of what happened here in a second. But just to lead it off, there's a lot of document management systems out there that have some sort of version control. SharePoint and Windows are kind of two that I'd assume most everyone has used, which have ways to access or restore previous versions if they were configured to do so. So some online or cloud storage platforms also have version control. Prior to joining ODOT here, I had a fairly long history with using ProjectWise on many different types and sizes of projects. And versioning was something that I'd used and encouraged a lot of others to use in certain situations. So since being here, I've tried to promote that, the use of versions to several folks in different occasions, and most really weren't familiar with that capability or that it even existed or how to use it. So an example of what happened here recently to an ODOT user was the designer had a geometry review comments that he wasn't quite sure if they were going to work, and sort of suspected that they may revert back to the original design after those changes were looked at. So what he did was he wanted to look at them, but he took his original files and exported them from ProjectWise and put them on the file server, which was all fine. Went ahead and made the revisions to the file that was left in ProjectWise. Somebody
I think you'll have to unmute yourself, man. I think they hit mute all.
No, thanks. All right, so I'm not sure where I left off, but so the user had made some changes to his design, and sure enough, they came back and they decided they didn't want to use those, and we're going to go back and use the exported copies they had made. So what they did was deleted those files from ProjectWise and just put the old files back in there. And if you've worked with ProjectWise long enough, I think everyone should be aware that it handles reference files a little bit differently than it would on a file server. You can't just replace a file with the same name because it uses a unique identifier for the file to follow that around. So we can move a file from folder to folder and rename that file even, and MicroStation will sort of resolve that file name as it goes. So that said, there were some issues with reference file pathing. All the files in the project had to be repathed, and there was also some other stuff that I'm not going to quite get into today. But when I suggested the use of versions, he wasn't aware that it existed, and I sort of explained it and gave a quick demo. and he thought that that would have definitely been the better route to go. So if none of that makes sense, hopefully it will when we're done here. And then after that scenario had happened, I suggested to Jack and Brandon that this would be a good topic for a webinar. So here we are. And since I suggested that, I guess I was the one chosen to present. So let's take a look. I will paste this link here. Just wanted to, oops. Just as full disclosure here, most of the text in the following slides were taken directly from the Bentley help documents. So that's the link there, and I pasted it in the chat. So bear with me as we get through the slides. It may get a little bit boring, but I promise the information there is important to at least know or to be able to kind of refer back to this recording later. And when you see the demos, you'll see that it's a rather simple process. All right, so what is a ProjectWise version? So a version is a read-only snapshot or a backup per se of a document. You could create a version when you want to capture the state of a document at a certain point in time. Obviously, that's what a backup is. And these are shown in ProjectWise Explorer with the read-only book icon. The original document will remain unchanged except for the version and sequence properties. So I've highlighted those in yellow just to point out we're going to talk about more what those are here in a second. A new version is created with the same name, description, file name, and in the same folder as the original document. And these are sort of linked together in what they call a version set, I think is the correct term. You'll also see the term original document and active version used throughout this presentation and in the help document. And so when we create a version, the original document is now considered the active version. So the original document is the first instance of a file or document that is created in ProjectWise. Once you create a version or versions of a document, the active version is just that. It's the active instance of that document. So as I mentioned, we have properties, version, and sequence. I just wanted to point out where you can find those. So any document has these two properties. And here you can see those properties in a document properties dialog box here. So when you hit the space bar, right click on a file and go to properties, you can see that you can review the version and sequence number. And an original document, I think, shows up in another slide, but the original version or original document does not have a version assigned to it. So this screenshot shows a couple other ways to review document properties. If you set the view in the upper, well, you may not see that view option on in ProjectWise. If you right click sort of in the header there, you can toggle on whether you see the view pull down menu or not. And once you do that, you should have the DGN option. So by default, the columns for version and sequence are there. They may not be in the same order that I show here. You may be able to, or you might need to just slide those around to where you want to see them. So you can see here in this view, I have an original document, or excuse me, an active document or active file with the pencil icon, meaning that that one can be written to. And I have two versions created that have the read-only book icon there. And we see that the top two have a version A and B listed to them, as well as a sequence. We'll talk more about those here in a second. Down the bottom part of the document properties view in Explorer there, you'll see the version and sequence is also listed. So the version field or property is what Bentley calls a label. So if you're reading the help, going through that, they also refer to that as a version label. So it just helps distinguish one version from another within a version set in the document list. When a new document is created, that version field is going to be empty. You can either add a label or leave it blank when you create a new file or a new version. When you create a new version, you actually have two labels. You can actually set 2 different labels, one for the new version and then one for the active version. For the active version label, you can either let ProjectWise assign a version identifier to it. So in my screenshot there, by default, I just let it use A, B, C, and so on. And or you could enter in your custom label that you want. So each version label must be unique within a version set, and you cannot reuse the same label for multiple versions in a set. This also means you cannot have more than one version with a blank label. So lastly then, a label is limited to 32 characters. So my suggestion here, as far as creating your labels and how you want to apply them for versions, is to just keep them short and sweet. Although I don't really show it in the demos later, I like to use the date sort of in a year, month, and day format so that I can quickly know when that version was created. There are probably other ways to find that within the properties, but it's just a quicker way to look at it. Or I like to use a particular project milestone when creating a version for files of the same type. So for example, I'm not sure how many folks at ODOT sort of have a geometry lock sort of stage. You get to a point and you want to lock your geometry, so you could go in and save all the files at that point, or even stage 1 or stage 2 kind of design if you wanted to create a backup or a version of all the files on that project at that milestone. You could do that and users would know that that was the version of the file at that point in time. So this may sound a little bit confusing, but it'll all make sense here when you see it. So we talked about versions, so then we also had sequence. The sequence is a little simpler because you really don't get or can't assign it or change it actually. So the sequence property or field displays the version sequence number, and it indicates the order in that version set to which it belongs. So the sequence numbers are automatically assigned, cannot be changed by the user, and every new document is automatically assigned a sequence number of 0. So when you create a version, the sequence number of the original document is incremented by 1. And this bullet point is confusing. And even as I look at it now, I have to stop and think about what it's actually saying. So the new version takes the original document or active document's former sequence number before it was incremented. So when you create a new version, it has a sequence number of, let's say 2, for example. When you create the version of that new version is going to take on that sequence number. So that doesn't change. And then the last bullet point there is the highest number is always the active version. Okay, so that was it for versions and sequence. You'll see those here more in a bit. I thought this section of the help needed to be shown and talked about. I realize it's a lot of words and some different colors that probably all run together, but I wasn't sure how to show it any better. So here goes. A document and its version are part of a relationship, a set relationship. So whatever you do to that active version is generally going to be done to all its versions as well. So if you were to copy a active version to another folder, by default, the document and all its versions are going to be copied with it. Although you will be prompted, or you do have the option to not copy those. So if you were to copy a file that had those, you should see a prompt that says, do you want to copy all these versions, yes or no? And then if you want to move an active version to another folder, and the data source is configured to allow documents that have versions to be moved. So there are some data source settings that happen in the background, and I highlighted this in yellow because this is the ODOT configuration. If externals are reviewing this later, that they may need to talk to their ProjectWise administrators to confirm those data source settings on their end. So we have that set so that if we decide to move a active version, the versions will all go with it. You cannot move a document without also moving its version. So other data source settings may prohibit that as well. And you cannot move individual versions. They're all part of a set, so we can't move those individually. Lastly, if you want to delete an active version, the document and all its versions will be deleted. So don't think because you've created some versions that you can go and delete the active one and then just come back and promote a previously created version or restore that previously created version to be used. I will show another way to restore the version or promote an old version back to active here in a bit. All right, so hopefully that's clear as mud. There's a few other notes that I just threw in here. Some of these were from the help, others were some stuff that I had just had from experience. So ProjectWise retains all the versions of a document until you delete any or all of them, just like I just mentioned. Versions can also be deleted like any other document in ProjectWise. So if you're concerned about this, you can hide their display in the document list. And I'll show that in a second also. And security settings could be applied. That would probably come from the administrator side of things so that we could prevent versions from being deleted. But because you can delete individual versions, it will be possible to have gaps in the version and sequence numbers. So you may see that. I don't necessarily demo that, but you may see that in your project if someone's done something like that. Changing the name, a document name of the active version does not rename any of its versions. So therefore, if you create some versions and then change the name of the active version and then create more versions, you will have versions with different document names in the same version set. Again, that's one of those descriptions that sounds more confusing until you see it. I guess the only recommendation at that point is if you are going to use versions for your project or versioning, once you sort of create some versions, you really don't want to rename files. And I know some people like to have all their file suffixes in the numbers in order. So maybe an example, like you had 9 plan and profile sheets on your project and you came back and had to add a 10th, what happened to be at the beginning because the extents, the beginning of the project moved back or something. And you add that 10th sheet and that's really now going to be, file number 1. You're not going to be able to change that. You would have to delete all the versions to do something like that. So I tend to not get hung up on that file suffix if number 10 is actually last in the list, but it is actually, we just number the sheet so that it is first in the set. So also, you cannot edit properties of a version. So you can only edit the active version's properties. So if you want to change the description, you can only change that on the active version. You can also create as many versions of a document as you need, and you can either take the original document or create a version for it, or you can create or take an active version and create a version for it. So just remember, when you see original document, that's sort of the first instance of that, and then active version is any versions that were created after that of the original document. And the document can only have one active version. So if needed, you can switch active version by taking a non-active version and making it active later. So I'll show that. I call it promoting a version to be active. You can also take and create a new version for a master document and all its references. I won't read this whole bullet point here, but it basically says that it's supported for both MicroStation references and AutoCAD XRefs. And There is some data source settings here that will allow this or not allow this to follow the new version. So what this means is the third bullet there, if there's a data source setting, if this data source setting is off, the active version of the master document will be linked to active versions of its references. So what that means is if we create a version of a reference file, that new version will always be attached to any other files that it's being referenced into. There is a data source setting that will allow it to retain that previous version, which is probably a bad workflow, so we don't have that on. So that's why I said that that's the ODOT default. So any new version that will become the active version, and that's what will be referenced into any other files. Okay, hopefully everyone's still with me. And I sort of, I talked about the last bullet point here, master document and all its references, but here's the several ways to create new versions. There's probably a couple other, these are gonna be your most common. So from ProjectWise Explorer, we can select the file and then we'll select document, new, and version, or just right click on it and you can say document, new version as well. We can also create a new version when we check in a file. So you may have noticed when you close a DGN or even a spreadsheet, for example, when you get the check-in dialog, there's a little section toward the bottom where you can toggle on create new version. We can do that right from there. You can also drag and drop a file from Windows Explorer. So just like if you were putting in files that you might have got from another source, you may just drag those and drop them in. When you do that and a file already exists with the same name, it will prompt you or ask you what you want to do. And we have the option to create a new version there. We can create or promote previous versions to the active version. And when you do that, it essentially creates another version. So hopefully that makes sense. We'll look at that here in a second. So, and then what I just talked about as far as creating a master document and all its references. So those are a couple quick demos I have coming up. I'll highlight those. Before we get into it, in order to view versions in the ProjectWise Explorer, you must toggle on the show all versions in the options dialog. So if you go to tools, options, and you look at the settings tab on the document list, you'll see a show all versions. So we just need to check that on and hit OK, and then you'll see the versions listed in ProjectWise Explorer. You do not need to have show all versions toggled on to create versions, only to view if you want to view all of the versions that were created. And in fact, I would recommend leaving it off unless there is a case where you really want to or need to look at what was created there. Okay, so here's a quick demo showing how to turn that show all versions on. And there we go. So we'll go to tools, options, we'll click on settings and expand document list and toggle on show all versions. And you can see this example here. I had a couple versions created, and when I select on that active file, and I'm looking at the view option that I mentioned earlier, so we set that to DGN. I can see the version in sequence columns were there, and then I also pointed out the version in sequence in the properties dialog. And then I just show how to go turn it all off again, the same place. And so you can still see that the version and sequence number are still listed. So you do have an indication that there are versions of that particular file that are created. In the future, we'd like to add a custom ODOT type menu that will have some other shortcuts to other tools and things, links. Talked to Brandon the other day, think that probably adding a quick shortcut to turn that on and off with less clicks is something that is doable, so that you might see that coming in the future. Oh, let me pause this for a second. Okay, so this demo, wait a minute, that's the same one. Okay, so now we're going to look at creating a version from ProjectWise Explorer, just using select the document, and we'll go to new version. So here, let's take a look. So I'm going to select my document. I have no version, so I'm in the original document here, so I can go to document new version, or what I ended up doing was just right clicking and went new version here. So you will see this section, the middle section here shows the active document or the original document's properties. So there's no version number assigned in there. We could assign that here if we wanted to say original or something of that nature. But you also see the sequence number 0 indicating that's the original version. So then we have the new version field here. This is where we can enter in whatever we want, or in my case there, I just left it blank, and we'll see that ProjectWise will assign a alpha character of A to that. I also clicked on the comments tab, and I can come in and add in a comment for my version. I can also review previous comments that were used, and I can just select that if I want it to apply to that same file. So here I just went back to show that that field was blank and clicked OK. And you'll see that my new version was created, has the version name of A and a sequence of 1. And then I went back and reviewed the properties of that file. And I wanted to show that when we look at the audit trail, I can see that the label in new version was in the comments properties there. From here, I'm just going to go and create a couple more versions. I'm going to leave the new version field blank just so you can see. But I also pointed out that the previous version is A and the sequence number 1 was shown there. And here we'll see that version B was created and it is sequence number 2. So I like to use F5 just to refresh them to get them back into a nice order. So now we'll see that the sequences are all in order and the highest number is the active version. And then here I'm going to go in and create another version and just show how to populate that new version field. So I call this design 2. And we'll see that now design 2 shows up in that list, and I refresh the view and we have sequence number 3. So now I just go back and I'm going to create another version, and I'm going to leave the new version field blank again. We'll see the design 2 is in that middle section of active document. And you'll see now that the new version that was created here was created as version D. So it retains that sequence of alpha characters, and we'll just skip or keep moving on. So version 2 would have been version C had we left it blank, and it'll do that throughout. So you can add your own in, or you can leave it blank, and it'll always add in some sort of alpha character. And if you get to more than 26, it'll just add AA or AB, AC, so on. Okay, so now let's look at creating a version when we check in a file.
Hey, Matt.
Yeah.
There's a question about, do you create the version from B or from A or the original? Does that matter?
You can only create a version from the active document. So whatever the one is that has the pencil there or the highest sequence number, that's going to be your active document. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
Yep. All right. So let's look at creating a version when we check in a document. And again, I'm using DGN files here. This will apply to any other file type you have in ProjectWise. So here, take a look. So I'm going to open up my file here. So I'm going to make some changes for today, and I did a lot of work in this session. So when I close this file, I'm prompted with the check-in dialog, and you'll see here in the middle, you may have noticed this before, not known what it did. We can toggle on create new version. We can also give it a label. So I called this design final. And I can also go to the comments tab here and add in a comment. So I said this was my final design was approved here. And then you'll notice that let me pause this for a second. You'll notice that the update server copy and free buttons are grayed out. So because we toggled on create new version, we don't, we can't just update the server copy or free it. We must check that file back in. So then I go back to the general field. You could hit check in from the comments, but I just wanted to check that everything stayed the same. Check my file in and we'll see that my new version of design final was created. So that's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. So you can do that as often as you want or as little as you want. Again, for any kind of creating versions, I would do it at some sort of milestone, or if there's a significant change, you want to be sure to retain the previous copy of it, or maybe you're not sure of what you did is what's going to go forward. Those are good situations to use that. Okay, so you'll probably run into an instance where maybe you receive a file from an external that you needed to replace the file, a document that you already have in ProjectWise. This is assuming you haven't given that external entity access to your ProjectWise project. So there may be a scenario where they're working on one file or two files and they just email them to you or something like that. So in this case, we can just drag and drop from Windows Explorer. So here I have the same file name in Windows Explorer. I can just drag and drop this into ProjectWise. I'm going to select no wizard there. But then I'm prompted, what do I want to do here? It says this file already exists, so I'll select create new version. We can add in a version string. I think I leave that, or version label. I do add that in. So I said this is a consultant design. And then I click OK. So we'll see that that version is now created. I didn't do any boxes on this one, I apologize. But we'll see that the active version now says consultant design, and that's sequence number 6. Okay, so those are all ways to create a new version, but what do you do with them once you have them all created, right? So we've created them for reasons, but obviously there's that need or the purpose that we've created them for. So at some point we can promote one of those back to become an active version. So I think in this scenario that I'm showing here, we don't like or we need to go back to the design before the consultant provided this file to us. And you'll see we didn't quite like this design, so we're going to go back to a previous design. So I opened the file up just to show the contents of it. So I'll close this and check it in. And here I want to go in and I'm going to right click on this file and I'm going to go new version again. And we'll see the same dialog obviously, but this time we're going to hit edit. And this will list all the versions that are in ProjectWise. So I'm going to select my design final, which happens to be the top one there, and I'll click change. And when I do that, I'm prompted, you want to change this version to become the active document. So we'll say OK. And it doesn't do anything with that version, but it actually creates a new version. And we'll see that that version was called, because I left the label blank, that version was called G. We'll see that consultant design version still there and design final still existed. Now, so now when I open my new version that was promoted back up, you'll see that my original design that I drew in is now my active version. All right, so the last way we're going to look at to create a new version is for a master document and all its references. So when I say master document, that'll be maybe your sheet file or that you end up having attached. Well, it can be any document or any DGN file that has a reference file attached to it. So in this case, I have all my master document and all my 3 references are all in the same folder. And I'm going to create a version of these all at once. In many cases, all our references are scattered throughout in different base maps folders. So it would also create those in the respective folder of that DGN file. So here we go. So what I want to do is I'm going to start by looking at my master file. I have those 3 reference files there. I'm going to go to the document and I'm going to go to set, and then we'll go over to click show references. So this is going to show us this document set or this link set that's there, and you'll see there's our master document with all our references. I'm going to highlight all the ones that I want to create a version for. So I want to create a version for all of those files. So I can add in a version string just like we've seen before. I'm going to leave it blank here, but then we can hit on the preview and it's going to show us which files are going to be affected. When I click OK, you'll see that a new version for each of those 4 files is listed there. And I lost my view, so I set that back to DGN, and I can now see a version A is the active document for each one of those DGN files that was there. So since this was sort of the end of the demos here, I just wanted to show again how we can turn off to show all versions. In all likelihood, you're not going to want to see that as you're working from day to day. So I just went back into the options and went to the settings tab, turned that off. So I see none of the versions listed anymore. And I also just went back to the folder that I was working in previously, and just to show that none of those 7 or 8 versions I had there were shown as well. All right, so there are some things to watch out for. Renaming the active version does not rename all versions. So if you rename that file, so we rename file A to file B, we cannot replace file A with another file of the same or original file name. Okay, so because all those versions still have that file name of A or reference A, we can't do that. So we need to you would need to delete all the versions if you wanted to or had a need to do that. I can't remember if the next slide shows it or not. So if I did rename a file, I think I do talk about that in a second. If not, I'll come back. Deleting the active version also deletes all versions. So I mentioned this earlier. Don't assume that if we delete that active version, you don't want that one anymore, that you can go back and grab the old version. If you did that, you're gonna lose all those versions and you have to restore it just like we would restore from the recycled folder or submitting the ticket to have that restored from Bentley. Maybe I didn't talk about that. Maybe I mentioned it earlier, but I will say it again before I move on to that next slide. So if we were to rename document A to document B, and then we created versions of document B, I think I did mention this. So I created 3 more versions of document B. All those files will still, or all those versions will still be part of the same version set. I probably should have shown an example of that, but I think you should get the point. It retains that file, that unique ID that's assigned to those files. So this is another one that's going to be important as far as keeping or whether or not to have show all versions toggled on. So when we have this toggled on and you go to the MicroStation or ORD attach reference dialog, it will also show all of those versions that were created and potentially allow you to attach an old version. So that could be dangerous in well, many cases. You would be attaching an old copy of that file. So be very careful of that. which is why I suggest that keeping that toggled off is probably the best thing to do. If you do run into a scenario like that, or you see file names like this in your reference dialog or the attachment properties, you'll see that the VER, I think there's 5 zeros there, 0000, showing the version number. That's actually the sequence number of the file. So this was, in this example, sequence 0 was attached, the version of the sequence 0 was attached to this file. So if you see that, we want to make sure that that really should be the case or not. I would strongly suggest not doing that for production plans. Maybe in an instance where you needed to, maybe you wanted to review something that was done previously, you could do that, but I would not. I wouldn't leave it there permanently. And that's all on my slides. I am going to just drag ProjectWise Explorer back onto my screen. Since I was mentioning, possibly reviewing a file, I just wanted to point out that we can also open a version. It would open it read-only with ORD or MicroStation. So you could review a file that way. And probably the better way is if you wanted to look at what might have been in a file, if you click on the Navigator tab of ProjectWise Explorer, we can review the contents of this file. So if I were to click on my master document, you'll see I have reference A, B, and C just attached to those, and then I can review all those files with Navigator and see what was there. So there was no change in any of these versions that was made, so they'll appear the same, but I just wanted to point out that that's a quick way to review them and don't, rather than attaching them to a file. So that was all I have. We'll open it up for any questions or discussion.
Yeah, thanks for that, Matt. That was good. Interesting stuff. It's a nice tool. I just, would reiterate that when you're using it, put comments in, don't overuse it. So you can keep track of, what you're versioning and why.
Right. Probably not a great idea to create a new version every time you check a file in, but definitely at certain milestones or something for sure.
Yeah. And then also I mentioned that Navigator tab. You probably do not have that. That's part of the software upgrade we're pushing out this weekend. So when you get ProjectWise 3.434, we've added that Navigator tab into the install. So look for that after the upgrade this weekend. So yeah, the floor is open for any questions about the versioning or any other ProjectWise questions that are on your mind. So let us know.
Matt, I have a question about making a new version when you're checking it in.
Okay.
Say you're in like your alignment file in the morning, you make a bunch of changes and you want to create a new version when you check it in. What happens to that original alignment file? Does it get checked in as well without any of the changes made? Or I guess how that works? That makes sense.
Yeah, so the original file will be as it was when you opened it. So the moment before you checked it out, that because you haven't checked that file back in yet, so it when you check out a file, it copies it locally, and you do all that work locally. So the server copy, so to say, still is what it was when you first opened it. So that would become the version. And when you hit the check-in, when you hit the new version at check-in, the changes then would just create the active, what's going to be called the active version then from there. That makes sense?
Yeah, so if you didn't, like Kyle said, if you didn't do any like the update server copy during the day, your original copy would be just like you opened it. If you got in the next day, it would just be like you opened it the day before with none of your new changes, correct?
The original, the version that was created would be just like the day before, yes. But the active version, the active version will have all your changes in it.
Okay,
It's like freeing
the original and creating a copy of the new one, but instead of a copy, it's like better. It's tied. So yeah, to answer your question, it's basically considered the original one non-affected.
Yeah, that's a good example as far as freeing it, it would be the same sort of status.
All right, thanks. That answers my question.
So then my experience too, previously I would do this, like I said, at certain milestones, and I did have consultants or externals, I should call them, other consultants or working with us on our team. They weren't aware that that was going on. So then they would do sort of the example I was mentioning where they would rename a file and try and put in a different file name or the same file name in, and sort of ran into problems. So we sort of just had to educate them on that. So if you do have externals working on our projects in ProjectWise, and they start to run into issues with something like that, we will want to, we need to educate them or at least let them know why that might be.
So there's a question there about ProjectWise to Environet for setting some sort of automation to do that. We're working with Environet people on that, so we don't have anything yet, but we've been meeting with them on a regular basis, and we're looking into that. So hopefully, sometime in the near future, we'll have that functionality.
Hey guys, this is Lawton from District 7. I had a question about connected project permissions and if that could be synced up with Ellis, because we had a situation where a PM was changed on a project and the new PM didn't have access to that project. And I think the only way they would be able to do that is if the old PM would be able to add them. Or you have any suggestions for that?
You can add users to a connected project through the work set creation tool when you make a project. You can actually modify an existing project and add people there, I believe.
No.
No?
No.
Okay. That's just when you create a project then. Then I would, anyone on the project can invite. So if you go to the connected project and go to that members list, you can add users. But you have to be a part of that project to do that. So you're asking if we can check Ellis and kind of like update the connected project permissions based on that?
Yeah, that would be ideal, and I think the easiest way for everyone on our district to, have access to the projects that they're project managing as far as connected projects if there was a switch. It's kind of a niche kind of situation, but
Would the old project manager still want to be a part of it? Like, is this like halfway through the project kind of thing?
oh, definitely.
Or
It's the beginning. It's just like I kind of related to all that. I think back like a year ago when we were messing around with the connected projects, I was given like an admin role, so I'm able to look up any connected project in the district, and I think others in the district would like to have that ability as well, because the way it is now is whoever gets added to that connected project by default is basically the project manager, or our environmental coordinator gets added to those as well. And then it's kind of on the PM from there to add everyone else to it. But there are some people in the district that would like to access all those connected projects, regardless of whether they're involved with it or not?
So there's actually a new feature with connected projects that we can look into, Lawton. It's a toggle to sync projects, like sync users to a connect project. We haven't tested it yet, but we'll put that on our list to look at. But in the description, essentially what it does is it syncs users to that connect project. So ideally, you should be able to search for that project without being added to it. If you have access in, ProjectWise, because it, mirrors ProjectWise Explorer permissions. We'll test that though, and we'll get back to you on that. Hopefully that works the way it's intended, and you don't really have to add users in that regards if they already have permission.
Okay, that'd be great. Thanks, guys.
So, yeah, we're over our time here. So if you got to go, we'll hang out for a few minutes if there's any more questions. Otherwise, thanks very much for attending, and we'll look forward to next time.